everyone, I'm Sam Peterson and welcome to the Millcreek Government Channel. Today we have Brian Gula, Environmental Education Specialist from the DCNR here to discuss Presque Isle history, as Millcreek is the gateway to Presque Isle as we continue to transform the Gateway District. Presque Isle and Millcreek are linked in both the past and the future. Brian, welcome.
Hey, thanks. I'm really glad to be here, and of course, this is probably my absolute favorite topic of Presque Isle history. I'm from Erie, so I'm an Erieite myself, and when I started working at Presque Isle back in 2001, I had no idea the journey that I was about to take. We do a lot of interpretive and environmental education programming for the public and kids of all ages, and I kind of fell into it. The park has a large resource of history archives. And when we kind of moved up to the Tonbridge Environmental Center back in 2005 is when we started making the move, and then the grand opening was 2006. The management approached me and said, hey, do you want to gather up and take care of all the history archives? And I said, yeah, no problem. So, but I mean, we're talking tons of information, and just the more and more I started, kind of looking through all this stuff, I was just blown away. And as an educator, being able to, share my knowledge and what I experienced and what I learned, there is so much history that many of us don't know. I mean, I can take you out on the peninsula and I could, have you stand in one spot and be like, all right, underneath your feet, there's a rock wall that's 15 feet wide, 25 feet deep.
Wow. And
you would never know it because it's completely covered in sand, right? So I love talking history.
Well, hopefully we can talk some more today. So would you say that's mostly what you do at Presque Isle, just the education aspect, taking over those historical archives, and just kind of shepherding the park?
Yeah, it's fantastic. We have a great opportunity with Presque Isle and just our hometown in general, and with facilities like the Tonbridge Environmental Center, utilizing it for, teaching kids and when they come out for their field trips. And for me, there's just nothing better when, you get a local student that, maybe hasn't been to Presque Isle before, hasn't actually been to the beach yet, and their first experiences with us, and you're walking them out on the beach or on a trail, and they experience it. They see a deer, or they find a really cool rock, or maybe a fossil, and it's just those. It's just getting those simple things. It's those simple things that make a huge impact in appreciating our natural resources.
Gotcha. So I guess let's start into it. So like a starting point, how old is the peninsula?
Well, again, it always comes down to natural resources, and Presque Isle is such a unique story because our geological history is amazing. So this entire area was covered in several different glacial events, and so it's what led to shaping what we enjoy today. And the last ice age roughly started to kind of recede about 9,000 to 10,000 years ago. So as those glaciers were receding, leaving these large depressions that eventually become our Great Lakes, right? And so Lake Erie, really the main thing that kind of set us up for success for this unique, amazing landform was this rocky moraine that kind of stretches in between present-day Presque Isle and Long Point, Canada. And this large rocky moraine, as time went on, sediment kind of settled as Lake Erie was filling up, and creating eventually this giant kind of sandbar that eventually becomes known as a shifting sand spit. And we had a gentleman by the name of Otto E. Jennings. We actually have a state park named after him near Butler. And he was the first one to do a botanical survey on Presque Isle in 1909. He published. And so basically identifying some very unique plants. He kind of put Presque Isle on the map as a very unique area for habitat that is producing some of these species of plants and animals that you just can't find anywhere else in the state of Pennsylvania. We have prickly pear cactus that grows on Presque Isle.
I did not know that. Wow.
So
that's cool.
It is.
Yeah.
So these natural resources, the environments are very unique because the sand's constantly moving, changing the habitats. And so Otto developed what was the term succession. Okay, so you kind of go from a new shoreline to new ponds, the old ponds, the marshes, the climax forests, and so you know. So you have all these different habitats in a very small area on the peninsula. And through him kind of identifying these different plant species, he realized that there was kind of a way to age the peninsula, depending on what species were growing where. And so he developed this really cool map that we still use today. And we kind of get his early projections of the peninsula hasn't always been where it is presently. He predicted that the peninsula was much further to the west.
Really?
Yep. So Walnut Creek, okay? So the mouth of Walnut Creek is predicted to be where the original neck of the peninsula may have started out to be.
And so, over time it shifted east.
And over time, as those currents are constantly moving that sand from west to east, imagine the peninsula acting like a slinky as it slinkies down along the shoreline. Once it hits a point, the neck gets narrow and breaks away and starts going and slinking further down the shoreline.
Okay,
so,
I see.
Yeah. So when Otto kind of discovered the plant species, a lot of folks are familiar with the waterworks area on the peninsula, with the two ponds, the ferry slip.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, back in 1909, that area was called Chimney Ponds. Okay. And so that area, by Otto's discoveries, was the oldest part of the park, and he dated it to about 1309.
I would never have expected that. That's interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So that, and so what that means is that the waterworks area, that was the end of the peninsula in the year 1309, or roughly in the 1300s.
Yeah.
And so from there, as the neck continued to move and break away at certain times, all of that land that we have today east of the waterworks, we can date it because we have these ancient ridges that were left behind as the shoreline was building up the sand. So, for example, if anyone has ever taken a walk on Sidewalk Trail by the lighthouse, as you're walking down Sidewalk Trail, you'll notice on your right-hand side these dunes that are in the woods with trees growing on them, and they're like 12 feet higher than all the area around.
Yeah.
That's an ancient sand dune. That was the end of the peninsula.
And over time, it's just expanded, and okay, I see.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and the expansion and how things have moved in the Ice Age, that's all very interesting. And so when did the first humans come into play on the peninsula? When did it start getting used?
So we have a lot of really unique archaeological and some really interesting history with our area. We acquired some land, what we kind of call the Chicolet property, And we did a little test pit, okay? And so what was found were some evidence of humans living in that area. These little arrowhead points were dated to about 7,000 years ago. All right, so we have evidence of indigenous people living in this area. Now, 7,000 years ago, this area would have looked very different. The peninsula may not have even been in this area
as you just
quite yet.
described,
But Lake Erie was actually much deeper at this point in time too. So where our shoreline may have been 7,000 years ago is like Waldameer. You may have actually been swimming in the lake at Waldameer, right? At that time frame.
Interesting to think about, yeah.
You know what I mean? So there's evidence of indigenous folks and going up to our, what we understand is some of the indigenous folks that were living along the Lake Erie shoreline was what was called the Erie Honan, kind of known as the Eries or Eries people. But the Erie Honan were thriving and most likely utilizing the peninsula. We did find some artifacts of what's called sinker weights. So these are stones that kind of look like a figure 8 that are carved specifically to wrap vine or sinew around, and they use that as a casting net and for fish. So they definitely used the peninsula for a hunting and a fishing ground, and then that particular people were then absorbed into the Iroquois Nation roughly about 1648. But we still have evidence of other indigenous tribes living along the lakeshore up into the early to mid 1800s. So.
Very cool. Yeah. So what happened kind of after that? And then how did Presque Isle become a state park as we know it today?
So as we kind of get into the industrial age, we start getting into the 1800s, those natural resources become very important.
Yeah.
And early on, folks started realizing how important this natural sandbar, creating this safe harbor, and an opportunity of all of this life. So they found out very quickly that this fishery is one of the best around. And so commercial fishing is kind of one of the first industries that really kind of place, Erie on the map. And a lot of folks don't probably realize this or know this part of our history. The fishing industry was so lucrative that in 1925, we were listed as the #1 freshwater fishing capital of the world. Right?
Wow.
Wild.
Yeah. I wouldn't expect that now.
Right. And so, so in the early days of the 1800s, we actually had 2 sturgeon plants on the peninsula. So they were harvesting sturgeon, they were processing them. In fact, you can link a lot of the names that we have on the peninsula to some of this history. An area from Leo's Landing to the Lily Pond, where our ranger station is, our public safety building, that area historically was known as the Stink Hole. Okay? And
glad it's not anymore.
You talk to any fisherman out there, and they know that name. And how it received that name is because they were, after they would harvest and process these sturgeon, they're throwing these carcasses, just in the water. All right. So imagine millions of carcasses in the hot sun. All right. And the winds come from the west. So they're heading to the east, which means all of that smell is going right in the city of Erie. Hence the name Stinkhole.
Yep.
Right? And then that area in 1938 was changed to Swan Cove. Sounds a little
big jump.
Nicer. So The main industry, it really showcased how important these natural resources are, that they decided to, a lot more folks started paying attention of, we got to do something to kind of preserve how unique this area is. So eventually, legislation and a lot of folks in the Erie area started to kind of pay attention and get different folks to kind of look at preserving the peninsula. And actually, in 1920, the director from the national parks actually got a tour of the peninsula.
Really?
So they were kind of interested in possibly thinking about turning Presque Isle into a national park. So after the director comes and takes a look, he's like, you know, Presque Isle is not quite fitting into our national standards, but we think you guys should kind of look into the state park end of things. So in the history of Pennsylvania, our first state park in Pennsylvania was Valley Forge. Okay.
Yes.
And eventually in the 1970s, Valley Forge turns into a national park. So the second state park that was developed and set aside is Presque Isle. Okay, so 1921, we officially become a state park, Pennsylvania State Park, under the Bureau of Forest and Waters. Now we're DCNR, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And so technically, when you look at it on the books, Presque Isle is the oldest state park in our system, being created in 1921.
Yeah.
Now, present day, within the state of Pennsylvania, we are up to 124 state parks in our state.
But you were first.
Yes.
Technically second, but we'll just say first.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about all the restoration and preservation aspects of it becoming a state park, so how do the public access improvements kind of make that a challenge?
So this is such a significant part of our history. When Presque Isle becomes a state park in 1921, there was really no access to the peninsula at that time. How folks got to the peninsula was the ferry slip, bringing a ferry over, getting onto the park and walking. The waterworks was an area that kind of got developed early. So one of the first things when Presque Isle was developed as a state park, they organized this commission. It was called the Erie Park and Harbor Commission.
Yeah.
And they were the entity that was now going to be making the decisions on how are we going to manage the peninsula and how do we make it accessible for the public. So one of their first major projects was to build a road, And so that road came in, and again, there was a lot of delegation and there was a lot of communication and getting folks to allow those right-of-ways and bringing the road from A Street down through the Waldemere property and onto the peninsula. And that first road actually ended at the waterworks area in 1925.
Makes sense. I mean, that's where everyone came off that the ferry. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So this was a huge development in access to the peninsula and offering folks an opportunity to drive their Model A, or Model T onto the peninsula. And then eventually, they saw how important that this access was going to be. So they were able to get more funding and more support. And eventually, in 1927, extended the road from Waterworks all the way around the peninsula.
As we know it today.
As we know it today, all right? And so that commitment, once we provided that access, and we have such an interesting ecosystem, and that sand is always moving from west to east, and that wind's always blowing that sand around. So they found out real quickly that their road, they're going to have to do a lot of work to protect that road because every storm, every wind.
would imagine.
getting washed out. There's pictures of some of the early workers using horses, pulling plows, plowing 3 feet of sand off of the road, right?
Yeah.
And so if you can imagine the what we call Old Lake Road is still the original, that's the original road that went onto the peninsula, okay, over by Beach 1. And when you drive onto that road today, you have sand dunes and trees, and you can't see the lake, okay, because you have to go up and over those sand dunes to access the beach. Well, in the early days of that road construction, is if you were driving on that original Old Lake Road, the road was higher than the beach.
Huh.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah.
Right? So so that was a challenge because, again, with the natural forces of Lake Erie and that sand movement, that natural erosion process, it led to a lot of the structures and the infrastructure that we have in place today. So early on in the 30s, after they extended that road all the way around, that neck would breach through quite often, and they'd have to fix the road. So one of the biggest construction and what we would call protection of the road, they built a giant seawall. Okay, and so this seawall goes basically from the condos all the way to Beach 6, and that's the wall that, I mean, it's massive. We're talking 15 feet across, 25 feet, all rock and steel sheet piling.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so if you ever go, if you're walking on the beach area and you see these jetties that are coming out, these steel jetties, and there's some concrete jetties, those concrete jetties and those steel jetties actually tie in to that seawall, and that massive structure was all there to stabilize the neck and also protect the road.
Well, that makes sense, because I think most people, including myself, have seen those before and just had no idea what their purpose was or why they're there. Maybe they're part of some old structure. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and basically, I kind of view Presque Isle as kind of an engineer's playground, because every structure that was in place was to kind of solve an issue, but in a lot of cases it created another issue, and so another structure had to be put in. All right, and then another one, then another one, and then so the entire. When you look at, I have a map of the peninsula in 1946, and the entire lakeside is completely manufactured. All right, it's got structures.
Over time, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, you would have to
in place because of that natural erosion. But all of that kind of stems back to when the north and the south pier were constructed. Because you got to step back just a little bit. The peninsula in the early 1800s had these sandbars that kind of, one came off of the peninsula and one came off from the south side of Erie. And the channel at that time was kind of interesting to navigate. It kind of snaked up close to the Erie shoreline, and then it snaked up closer to the present-day Perry Monument, and then you navigated into the safe harbor. So the main historical structure that speaks to this, to the main mouth of the harbor early on, is the land lighthouse on the city side. Did you ever wonder why the lighthouse is over there?
Yeah. I mean,
right?
I've always thought that maybe they are linked, but yeah, okay, that makes a lot more sense.
So that's the earliest lighthouse on the Great Lakes, and that was constructed in 1818.
Yeah.
And so and the reason why they placed it there is because that was the mouth of the harbor.
Makes a lot of sense.
So if you're trying to get your ship into Presque Isle Bay, you had to be fairly close to the south shore, the lighthouse, guiding them in, and then you would snake up and get into the harbor. So the Army Corps of Engineers was given a task then to design a structure that would make it easier, make our bay a navigable harbor.
So how do you get information on all the history of Presque Isle? And we talked about it so much today, and you are so extremely knowledgeable. So is there anywhere that people can find more of this information?
Well, yeah, so we put out a program flyer every month.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we do a lot of programs. I actually have a history program coming up here on April 6th, but we do these throughout the year. And so what you want to do is go on to our DCNR calendar of events. You'll be able to see what kind of programs we offer. And we offer a lot of different kinds of programs. Lots of historical programs, but also night hikes. And we have this really cool program called Virtual Natural Wonders. We're still doing virtual programs, and
I do think we try and share those out in the Millcreek social media as well. There's so many great programs out there.
Yeah, and also, keep in mind too that for folks, if you haven't stopped into the Tom Ridge Environmental Center for a while, that's a great place to learn. We have a lot of exhibits in there and a lot of information on the formation of Presque Isle and the history of it. So. Through programs and visiting the park and just get out on the peninsula and walk around and see what you can see.
Brian, thanks again. We learned so much today, and we'll have to have you back on to talk some more about Presque Isle history. I think we only really scratched the surface here.
Yeah, for sure. I'll definitely be able to come back and talk more history.
And thank you to the viewers. We learned so much today about Presque Isle history. Please check out their site, check out some events, check out the Tom Ridge Environmental Center. There's so much out there. Have a great day, Millcreek. Till next time.